Today we're going to be talking about significance tests for quantitative data, and more specifically significance tests for population means. And before we actually figure out how to do these kinds of problems, how to conduct the significance test, I want to talk about the two kinds of procedures covered and the difference between these two procedures and how to know which one to pick. Now, the two procedures are the two-sample t-test and the paired t-test. And these two procedures differ in the way that the sampling is conducted. In the two-sample t-test, as the name suggests, two independent samples are taken, and the population means for these two samples are compared individually. Versus in a paired t-test, two data points are generated from a single individual or experimental subject, and the difference between the two means is compared, and that's how these two tests differ. An example of a two-sample t-test would be comparing the mean income between two countries, or in a paired t-test example would be comparing the before and after cholesterol levels of a test subject who has taken a cholesterol medication to lower cholesterol. Now let's get to how to actually solve the problem. We have a four-step process, which is state, plan, do, and conclude. In the state portion, you want to address your hypotheses. In a two-sample t-test, your null hypothesis is going to be that the means are equal of the two populations. And your alternative hypotheses are that the means are not equal, or one mean is greater than or less than the other. In a paired t-test, your null hypothesis will be that the difference between the means is zero, is non-existent. And your alternative hypotheses will cover that the difference between the means, it does not equal zero, or is less than or greater than zero. In the plan portion of your four-step process, you have to meet three conditions: the random, 10%, and normal conditions. Now, in the random condition, it's met for both procedures through either random sampling or random assignment, whether it's a survey or an experiment. And the random condition allows you to use random chance models to model the behavior of your outcomes, of your distribution. And the next condition is the 10% condition, which allows you to use the formula for standard deviation and guarantees approximate independence. And the 10% condition is met if the sample or experimental pool is less than 10% of a population that you're trying to generalize to. And the normal condition allows you to use a t-distribution to approximate the chance outcomes of a process. And for a two-sample t-test, the normal condition is met if both means come from a normally distributed population. Versus in the paired t-test, you only care if the differences between the two means makes up a normal distribution. And that's one common error here, is you don't care about the two different sets of observation that comes from each data point in a paired t-test. You only care about whether the differences between the two means are normal or come from a normally distributed population. And at the end of your plan phase, you want to state the name of the test that you're conducting and your alpha significance level at which you find statistical significance. The next step is the do step, where you will conduct a test and find your p-value. And you want to make sure during this step to state your degrees of freedom, because that's a very easy way to lose points on an AP style question. And you want to state your degrees of freedom right next to where you find your p-value, even if you're given sample size, just to make sure that your reader can see it. And based on the p-value generated in your do portion, your conclusion will be either to reject the null hypothesis or to fail to reject the null hypothesis. If your p is less than your alpha level, then you reject the null hypothesis, and if it's greater than, you fail to reject the null hypothesis. Regardless of your conclusion, you always want to remember to conclude in context to get full credit. And to get, if you want more practice on this topic, you would do 2006 question 4, Form B of the AP test, and that'll give you an extra practice on significance tests with quantitative data. And with the calculator, the way you're going to do the do phase for these two significance tests is with either the commands t-test and two-sample t-test. And these two commands have, the t-test is for the paired t-test, and the two-sample t-test is for the two-sample t-test. And both of these commands have two data input options. One of them is to enter raw data, and you want to be careful for the t-test that your raw data entered is the differences between observations, because that's what you care about. And the other option is to enter statistics, test statistics, and you will enter your sample mean, your sample standard deviation, and your sample size, and this will and then you will pick your appropriate hypotheses, and the test will spit out a p-value. Thank you for listening. How long did that go?